Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is The World This Week. With us, Marcus Mabry of the International Herald Tribune. Also with us, Thierry Arnaud of BFM TV, Naïda Nakad of France 24, and from the French news agency AFP, Dave Clark. Now, last week, while Thierry Arnaud was gearing up for another all-nighter at that EU summit in Brussels, here in the studio, the air-conditioned studio, we were joking that it was the week where France graduated from Germany bashing to Brit bashing. Well, now there's growing sense of humor failure, it seems, on both sides of the channel. Now, this Friday began with the French finance minister on a breakfast radio show here in Paris, and where he was asked about the UK opting out of that Euro Plus reform plan that was agreed to by all the other 26 members in Brussels.
We're not lecturing anyone, but neither will we let others lecture us, as some have done. It's true, Britain's economic situation is very worrying right now, and we'd rather be French than British at the moment when it comes to the economy.
All right. Now, the 46-year-old Barouin, Dave Clark, if you don't know him, he's relatively new to the job, youthful exuberance perhaps. Then, later in the day, his prime minister this is what he said. Our British friends are even more indebted than we are. This is on a trip to Brazil, and have a higher deficit, but the rating agencies do not seem to notice this.
And if it had just been those two, it would have been just those two. But yesterday also Mr. Noyer, the head of the French Central Bank, said very similar things to the Telegram de Brest, a local newspaper. And Barouin himself has said similar things in Parliament. It begins to look a bit like a campaign. And like you say, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about Germany bashing. That was the story of the week. People were worried about Germanophobie growing in France. And then this week, things seem to have turned, the attention seems to have turned to Britain. But I think there's been 1,000 years of bashing between Britain and France, and it's often ended up in warfare. So we should keep this we should relativize this a little. But I think it actually masks a bigger frustration they have with the structure of capitalism itself, and in effect with the ratings agencies and the markets right now. They're angry at the bond markets. They're angry at Standard & Poor's for threatening to downgrade them. They're angry a little bit at George Osborne, the British Chancellor of the Exchequer, Finance Minister, for comparing them to Greece. But they're also angry that the Germans won't let them print euros. And they know that the Bank of England can just turn the tap on anytime it likes. And that's why British bond yields are so low. French bond yields are not so low, and Italian and Greek ones are very high, because the Germans are insisting on not handing out money. So they're jealous of Britain, really. And I'm sure that's how the French would see it.
I'm sure Thierry Arnaud agrees with you.
No, I think there's a few things in those statements. I think after particularly what Chancellor Osborne had said, some French ministers thought it was maybe time for retribution. I think they're happy as well.
Because Osborne is accused of pressuring the markets into putting the heat on France.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's also a way for them to try and take the attention away of what's going on in France. I think it's very clear that at this point that within the next few hours or within the next few days as well, the AAA for France is going to go away. And I think what the French hope at this point is that it will be one of several countries losing AAA at the same time, so that France is not singled out, and that we don't go down by 2 ticks, where the others would only go down by 1. Let me tell you, though, that after making this particular statement, French Prime Minister François Picard felt the need tonight from Brazil to pick up his phone and call Nick Clegg in London, the Deputy Prime Minister, to try and patch things up,
smooth things
so
over.
to speak. Exactly.
Marcus Mabry, are you fascinated, because as an American in Paris, to be listening to people discuss le triple A, triple A ratings on just bog standard radio and television shows?
Well, I think the French should relax. We've been downgraded in the United States, and we've the appetite for our debt has never been greater since the downgrade. So I think they should relax. I mean, France does not have the same advantages because it's not the euro, unfortunately, is not a global reserve currency in the same way the U.S. is, and it's not seen as a haven the same way the U.S. is. So we do benefit from that. But that said, it's a very typical French reaction, the hatred, kind of the deep-seated mistrust, really, of the Anglo-Saxon, as it's often called, which means the U.S. and the UK, markets, and we're always supposed to be behind these, the markets and the investors. It's supposed to be us, and it isn't. It really is people who, as I said before, if you don't need other people's money, you can, conduct your affairs however you see fit. But if you need other people's money, and you do, because France is a heavily indebted nation like the U.S., then we are subject to what the market does to us. So the only way to change that is to actually get out of this debt crisis we're in. The problem is, you need to spend money to do that, and France, like its European partners, doesn't have the ability to do that. The real worry is not this silly polemic that's happening. The real worry is, I think 2012 is going to be much worse than 2011 was, because I think
January 2012.
right away. So I think it's going to be a really great situation, and I worry about Europe. I worry about Europe because really what I see is this is part of a larger geopolitical decline of Europe. That actually is going to be, we're going to see in even greater detail next year, and again, a subsequent rise of Asia. The U.S. will kind of hold in the middle as a kind of, eventually America will be a middle power, much like the U.K. is today. That was once a great hyperpuissance. That's what the U.S. is today, and that's over. And that's really, I think,
is
the
it
real.
a relative decline, or is it an actual decline? Is Europe going to be less powerful compared to Asia, or are we just going to be weak?
Yeah, I think it's going to be an actual decline. I really do. I really do.
And by the way, just you were mentioning that there's 1,000 years of banter between the French and the British. It's not like the British, by the way, to rise on the bait to such occasions. We can show you Matt, cartoonist for the Daily Telegraph, a man saying it's a AAA battery. I'm reminding the French of our credit rating. Now, on Monday, Britain's Deputy Prime Minister stayed away from the House of Commons as David Cameron, the Prime Minister, justified his decision to veto that deal in Brussels.
I am absolutely clear that it is possible to be both a full, committed and influential member of the European Union, but to stay out of arrangements where they do not protect our interests. That is what I've done at this Council. That is what I will continue to do as long as I'm Prime Minister. It is the right course for this country, and I commend this statement to the House.
Dave Clark, when Dave Cameron says that, you can remain a full...
Takes me right back to the 1980s. Tory Prime Minister standing at the dispatch box, bad-mouthing the French. It's like my youth all over again. If there was any coal miners left, they'd probably go on strike.
But is he? But is he right when he says that?
I think it helps both Cameron and Sarkozy to spin this up a bit. It does Cameron no harm at all with the British electorate or with his own backbenchers to be in some kind of fight with the French. And Sarkozy will do anything to distract attention from the AAA.
Now, let me get the inside story here on that summit in Brussels. Some people say that Sarkozy tended a trap to Cameron, that Cameron was caught off guard when, I don't know, 3 a.m, Friday to Saturday, when Sarkozy said, well, 26 of us agree, what's your position?
It was a little more complicated than that. I think there was early on a meeting between Merkel, Sarkozy and Cameron, where and that was before the actual summit started, which started by a dinner on Thursday night, was it? And at that point, it became very clear very quickly to Sarkozy that he couldn't get Cameron to agree to a deal at 27. So at that point, the basis for trying to make a deal started with the 17 countries of the Eurozone. And obviously, the hard work for Sarkozy and Merkel at that point was to get as many other countries involved as possible. The ideal result for them being at that point to get 26 countries to agree to a deal, leaving Cameron as the isolated one.
Which brings us back to what Dave was saying. Is it a draw? Is it both in their interest, or did one outwit the other, you think?
No, I think it's pretty close to a draw in my opinion, because it allowed Sarkozy to come back here in Paris and brag about getting a deal at 26, Britain being completely isolated and out of touch, and for many obvious reasons that Dave knows a lot more about than I do. I don't think it was in any way something that Cameron could have sold to the House of Commons. So I think everybody left happy to that extent.
All right, and
in a sense, it even gave Sarkozy a minor victory over Merkel, who wanted to reopen the Lisbon Treaty with all 27 members. Cameron's position made that impossible, and so Sarkozy got what he wanted, which was a new arrangement.
But I think the real problem with that deal is not 26 versus 1 or whatever the number is. The real problem with that deal is that it doesn't solve the problem. And you know the movie Groundhog Day? when I go to a European summit these days, I feel like I'm Bill Murray in Groundhog Day. It's the same day. You wait all day. You wait all night. They come at the end of the night, like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. They tell you that they have this wonderful deal, that the situation is solved. The markets seem to like it for a couple of days, and then they start to realize that basically the money is not there to try and solve the problem and to buy all this debt. And the markets start tanking again, and we make a new date for a new meeting that is worse than the one before in terms of how difficult the situation is when you get there.
And the nightmare for Thierry Arnault is only beginning, because now they're going to meet once a month.
Exactly.
All right.
But Mr. Cameron won't have to go. So he'll be very pleased about that.
The British said today that they want to be part in all the discussions, including those meetings.
Well, probably said Nick Clegg.
France's National Statistics Agency, by the way, predicts, and this gets back to the point that Marcus Mabry was mentioning, predicts a recession here over this and the coming fiscal quarter. It sees Germany plummeting fast, and with crucial treasury bond witching hours in the new year, already the euro is starting to fall against the dollar. That's kind of the story of this week, ending up the week slightly from 11-month lows. And by the way, the economy's headed south when the French lunchtime news runs Christmas shopping features on lesser-known sparkling wines that serve as bargain alternatives to champagne. Naida Nakad, will you be buying mousseux instead of champagne?
Both. Depends who I'm inviting.
But do you get the sense that there really is a pinch at this point?
Oh yes, I think there's a lot of aggressivity here in France. People are very worried. Shops aren't as full as they used to be. But then it's very hard to say, because we will have to wait until the end of the shopping period ends to see what it's like. But I would really have a question to Thierry here, is that you've been talking about dates, and everybody's been telling us that watch out, on that date it either collapses, either we're all like poor and the European countries, all the economies have collapsed, or they have found a solution. Now what you're saying is that they have not found a solution and nothing has collapsed. So what is happening?
Yeah, I mean, the complexity of it is that there is a long-term problem and there's a short-term problem. And what they came up with last week is the beginning of a solution to the long-term issue, which is how do you reduce the debt that is too high to be sustained. But the short-term problem is how do you face the next rounds of financing within the next few weeks, within the next year, that are going to be extremely high, and how do you at the same time cut everything in order to cut your deficit and try and still keep some semblance of growth to the economy. So they have an okay answer, shall we say, to the long-term issue.
But in the short term,
they don't have anything for the short-term problem. What all the experts seem to be thinking about are two things. Basically, one, allowing the European Central Bank to print money, or B, to create those so-called Eurobonds, whereby basically what that means is that...
for the time being, the Germans are balking at that. We're not there
exactly.
yet. Perhaps the media really is a little too personality-driven. Earlier in the week, Time magazine chose as its person of the year the protester. Now, some journalists in the France 24 newsroom sort of recoiled in frustration. The protester, that doesn't have a specific first and last name. And maybe, like many politicians, reporters just have a hard time getting around the concept of a leaderless revolution. Well, there's no such problem on the France 24's World This Week Facebook page. For Daniel from Rehovot in Israel, he says, I would stick to Time's choice. The protester, anywhere, from Tunis to New York, from Madrid to Tel Aviv. While Ayman, who writes to us from Tunis, says his choice is Mohamed Bouazizi, that Tunisian street vendor who, in frustration, set himself alight. And we before the show, we asked the panelists what they thought. And Marcus Mabry, that was your choice for... It
was my choice. You're talking about a 26-year-old fruit vendor, a simple man from a nondescript town 100 miles south of Tunis. And out of frustration for first being abused by the police, which happened to him all the time, according to his family. This is just the way things always were. And then he went and complained to the municipal authorities, who ignored him, and out of his frustration. And this is so much of human history happens out of frustration. I mean, people like Rosa Parks, who wouldn't go to the back of the bus, not because she wanted to change civil rights laws and anti-discrimination law, Jim Crow laws in the U.S. to bring down.
It was spontaneous.
She was tired. She didn't feel like moving to the back of the bus, and it's that frustration, that human emotion of, I just can't take it anymore, which leads to great historical moments. So for me, Mohamed Bouazizi is exactly the person in which all this kind of happened. Tunisian said his dignity was more important. His family said his dignity was more important than bread. And then all of Tunisia said, it's true, our dignity, we deserve more than this. And then Egyptians looked at Tunisia and said, oh, that's Tunisia. We're Egypt. We're much prouder people than they are. We have to change this too. That human emotion of frustration was so key. It was key in Eastern Europe and those revolutions. It was key in looking back to the American Revolution against the United Kingdom. It was Americans didn't want to be taxed anymore. It's these little frustrations that change everything. And I think Time should have had the courage to say Muhammad. I think he wasn't famous enough, so Time didn't put him on their cover.
Naida?
Yeah, I agree totally. And I would also say something else that was quite amazing is for 40 years we've been saying that the Arabs won't move because they're too scared. And here's a man who, not out of personal courage or desperation, but I mean he managed to move millions of people, and these people who everybody was saying they will never move, and I think he's the man of the year, definitely, because without him we wouldn't have lived all what we've been through.
All right, so two votes for Mohamed Bouazizi, very briefly, because we're almost out of time. Dave Clark.
Well, I think to be person of the year, you don't need to be hero of the year. You can be a villain, and I'd pick Muammar Gaddafi, because it's the last year he'd have a chance to win. Thankfully. Personal reasons, he agreed to release me from prison in March, which I thought was very kind of him. But also, frustration builds up because of guys like him, and he was
all right, the other side of the coin.
An extraordinary figure.
Thierry Arnaud?
I was greedy and I picked two. I picked Mohamed Bouazizi for all the reasons you have described, and I think it's important to remember what he stood for right now at a time where we're trying to build democracies, which is even more difficult than overthrowing a dictatorship.
And your second?
And my second was Angela Merkel, for all the reasons we've been talking about.
We will continue to talk about it in 2012. I want to thank all of you for joining us, and thank you for being with us for The World This Week.